So this is helpful. Um, so one of the things that I want to say first and foremost is that a lot of you are industry specific, so you have information from your professional association or from your industry association, and they tell you, here's what's going on in our industry. I just want you, when you read that information, please take it with a grain of salt, because Seattle is stronger. This is the third year in a row when Seattle is one of the top, highest, most successful, most strongest economies in the nation. So, so third year in a row for this. So if you are reading industry information, if your CEOs are looking at industry information, the trends are going to look different than they do here. One of the reasons why is because Seattle has very strong wages versus national averages. So you can see at the minimum wage, we're at 120% of national average. And as it goes up, it shifts down to like 15 or 14%. So the point here is that if you're looking at national data, you're going to be underestimating your expenses. So please keep that in mind when you're looking at data. I actually have a handout for you. You can take this with you. But this has salary budget increases for 2013. These are estimated budgets. And what you can see here is that the numbers are very solidly around the 3% range. We just completed our survey just a couple weeks ago, and and our numbers are coming out very similar to what the rest of the survey data sources are coming out to. The one thing I will mention is that in 2009, for the first time, up until 2009, we always did one data analysis, which is how much are your pay adjustments. And usually about 3% of organizations had some kind of pay freeze in effect in any given year. So the numbers don't shift that much, right? But this year, the numbers, in 2009, the numbers shifted a lot because we had 43% of our folks in our organizations with pay freezes in effect. So at that point, we started capturing two different sets of data, right? One with all organizations and one with only organizations that have pay increases in effect. So what's important to note here is that you're probably going to want to look at what all organizations with increases, if you're able to give increases. If your industry, if your particular subsector is close enough, I would use that as your driver, because this is diluted by those organizations that are having difficulty still in those industries where there's still difficulty. Does that make sense? And then another thing that I think is important to remember is that the numbers shift significantly depending on the industry. So if you're assuming a 3%, you know, that's great. That's a great all organization number, but the numbers are shifting significantly for different industries. So if you're in high tech, 3.3 is the number that you want to be focusing on. Some of the government and education have been much flatter, and these vary widely depending on how they're funded right now. This year, interestingly enough, high tech and biotech were right in the 3.3, 3.4 in the surveys that we did. And so you can kind of get a feel for it. Last year was interesting. The industry differentials were much broader. So this year the industry differentials are flatter, which I think means that overall in the Puget Sound area anyway, we're kind of all on the same path. Last year we saw various variations between 1.5 and almost 4% pay increase wise. So this is flatter, and that's actually a good thing, I think, for the economy overall. I mentioned before about pay freezes. Pay freezes are melting, and we've seen this continuing to shift down. Depending on which survey you're looking at, our survey versus some other surveys are somewhere between 4 to 9% for pay freezes in 2013. And and in a typical year, we're going to have a 3%. So we're really very close back to where we were a while back. We're still seeing pay freezes in a few industry segments. We're seeing some pressure in education, government, Some segments of retail is still a little bit challenged depending on what their specific niche is. A little bit wholesale, construction's a little flat still. So there's some areas where it's still flat, but generally speaking, we're back very close to where we were before. I like to talk about CPI versus labor market for a couple of reasons. One is that right now, Washington State minimum wage is indexed to the CPIW, the CPI worker index. Last year, that index moved 4.2%. Most of us didn't have 4.2% last year to give to all of our employees. So a 4.2% adjustment at minimum wage had a huge effect on some of us who have employees at that minimum level or close to it. It also has a huge effect on the pay ranges for positions around that general area, those lower paid positions. This year, my prognostication, and the announcement's supposed to come out September 30th, is will probably be around $9.33 an hour, somewhere in that range, which will be about a 3.3% increase, give or take. I mean, depending on exactly how they crunch the final numbers. So we're going to see another ratcheting up, and we're going to continue to see this as long as we stay indexed to the CPIW, which I know it's very frustrating. And what's important for us to be aware of is that the CPI and the cost of labor are not the same. I wish I could get this information to the legislature, because you can see that this red line here, that's the labor cost pay increases. That's the index where that shows what overall labor is moving year over year. And then the other one is the cost of the CPI, the actual cost of living. And what I wanted you guys to see is they move in the same direction, but they're not always moving at the same pace. And sometimes you'll see inversions. You know, in the 80s, there was a time when we had huge inflation, like double-digit inflation, but nobody was getting 12 and 15% pay increases during that time. So when I talk about what I want, and you guys understand the difference between CPI, which is consumer goods, the cost of consumer goods. So it's that package of goods that includes houses and gasoline and bread and eggs and everything else. And then the red line, which is cost of labor, it's the same idea. We look at how much a receptionist was paid last year, how much a receptionist is paid this year. We calculate the difference. We look at what happened with an accountant last year compared to this year, software engineer last year to this year. We aggregate that information, and that creates this red pay line, this cost of labor pay line. So this cost of labor pay line moves along, again, kind of sort of along CPI, but not the same. So when you're talking to your staff, I really encourage you to talk about cost of labor adjustments or across the board adjustments, and not cost of living adjustments. Because what has happened with some of our clients is they'll come back later, and we had this happen back here, where the cost of living looked like it was going to be, 2.5%, and then all of a sudden the oil prices spiked, and then they had employees pounding on the door saying, "Where's my next? I need a bigger cost of living adjustment." Cost of living went up. So we want to separate those two. So when you talk about it internally, you want to talk about cost of living, cost of labor separately. Most of us use those terms interchangeably. And I think it can, especially if we get into another inflationary spiral, which some economists say we will or we might, it would be really smart to keep those separated.